leaning back in a chair.
Any questions on the 4 stages of the learning process? Okay, awesome. So the implications of this diagram, the reasons we learn, what happens when we experience a physical action. So the reason that we talk about the 4 stages of the learning process going from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence or the mastery level. The reason we talk about that is because what happens whenever we're performing an action is this area of the brain lights up. You see it in red, and this area of the brain lights up. You see it in red? If you've studied diagrams of the brain, you know that this area and this area are the amygdala, which are responsible for our emotions, okay? This area, branching all the way through both hemispheres, is the limbic system, responsible for our long-term memory in the hippocampus, okay? So the red portion activates when you're doing something. So if you're doing jumping jacks, the red portion of your brain is lighting up, okay? If you're witnessing someone else do jumping jacks and you're watching them, the green part of your brain lights up. Almost identical to the region of the red.
But not quite as big.
Not quite as big. When you're hearing about the action, the yellow, again, the amygdala lights up and the hippocampus region, again, not quite as big. Hearing about, as witnessing, as performing.
Stinks, doesn't it?
It does. However, what's interesting is those areas of the brain light up regardless of whether you're doing, witnessing, or hearing about the action. So even if I talk about someone's eating a lemon and your lips or your mouth beginning to salivate and your lips pursing up, oftentimes in these seminars it happens to people, and the reason why is because of mirror neurons. They're responsible for the reason we learn, okay?
And what's interesting, what I think is interesting too, is they think probably over time that the hearing one has gotten smaller.
Yes.
Because how long's the printing press been around? 500 years. People can read and see things in their mind through written word and stuff, but prior to that, the masses were illiterate, so people learn a lot more
Oratory.
Oral.
Yeah.
Hearing about it, and that's how a lot of knowledge was passed on, not even through books.
That's why so much history was put into song.
That's what I was going to say. Muslims, the Quran is it's actually not considered official unless it's sung, and it's the whole Quran is set to a particular melody or whatever I guess you would want to call it, and it's sung that way, and it was done that way because it's easier to remember a whole book of words when you have a melody to put the words to than to just remember the words themselves.
And the founder was illiterate, so it makes quite a bit of sense.
Is that what the monks do?
So
They're singing something.
right, so the monks, right, so the
I love that.
when you have monks, they would have prayer multiple times throughout the day, but what they did is they would through their prayer, daily prayer, and I don't know how long it takes, I think it takes them a week to get through it, but they sing the Psalms from the Old Testament, and I guess they get through all 150 Psalms, and that it was put to music, it was sung, and that is to help them remember, is also to help the laity remember, because typically the monks were the ones who were educated. They were the ones that could read and write and pass that knowledge on, written that way. But it was more communicated to the people, and it's also easier for them to remember too by having the words set to music.
Oftentimes in the Roman Catholic Church, Latin Mass is still primarily done according to melody, a lot of the chants and different things, and it's because prior to the printing press and things of that nature, most of religious organizations, everything was passed down through music, through song, through oral traditions. And you're right, so the auditory has been reducing in years, but we still, I mean, even whenever our children learn the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I mean, we all know the melody, right? And happy birthday to you. We all know it.
Same melody.
It's all the same. We know the words, we know the lyrics. It still becomes a part of our nature. So we still know that hearing is a large part of activating mirror neurons, but it's about the specific hearing according to something that relates to something that you know. So it's like, if that makes sense, when we're talking about the mirror neurons activating by hearing, it has to be correlation. So when Pavlov talked about the conditioning response of the bell, whenever he would ring the bell and the dogs would salivate, he had to have that connected closely to when the food was introduced. So that trigger, that bell, had to be closely connected to the activity in order for that link to be made to where the bell would then correlate and cause that same response. So hearing the bell originally did nothing. It wasn't until the dogs linked and associated the bell to the food that now that creates that response. Okay? So that's why we talk about the hearing the action has to be fed back to the person the way that they experience that activity.
When I was a kid and I was learning spelling words and the words that I would have difficulty with, my mom would come up with a jingle to sing them. And so I would learn that, and that is how I learned my spelling words. And there are two words in particular that to this day, I still remember the jingle and know how to spell the words. One was science, because, you know, the I before E, and, you know, how that can get,
And
there are
C
exceptions
silent.
with words and all that. That one, for some reason I had trouble learning how to spell the word because. And those are the two little jingles
There's a
I
lot
still
of
remember.
vowels in it.
Yeah, that's
You get
awesome.
confused.
Yeah, M-I-S-S-I-S-S-I-P-P-I, right? All that stuff. Yeah, awesome. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's awesome.
Yep.
It can also help you wake up. Songs.
Oh, yeah.
I used to do that to my kids because they wouldn't wake up.
Mhm. So here's a diagram in case
I
anybody
still do.
didn't catch the correlation between the amygdala and the hippocampus region. Whenever we were looking at the diagram before, this area here is your amygdala. That was the area in the front of the cortex, and then on the back side we had what went through that region there was the hippocampus, responsible for long-term memories. Not having to try to remember those that go into unconscious long-term memory. Okay?
My mom would sing to wake us up in the morning too.
All right.
What was the song?
It was Rise and Shine,
Rise and Shine. Did
and
she
give
make
God
it
the
up?
glory.
No, I made mine up. The last line is, feet on the floor, please.
Feet on the floor,
When I
please.
saw those feet hit the floor,
Uh-huh.
I knew.
Then
that
you'd be
this
quiet,
song-
right? They're like, if we want to get mom to shut up, we put our feet on the floor.
Awesome.
But I knew if the feet were on the floor, that soon the body was coming.
That's awesome. That's great. I love that. Okay, we have to talk about this portion, inducing the pattern. And the reason why is because once people learn that we're actually training the brain through the 4 stages of the learning process by these pattern interrupts, oftentimes it seems a little bit cruel once you get someone to that positive emotional state to re-induce the negative emotional state. But once you understand the process of the learning process, you understand what the purpose is. It's to take this from conscious incompetence through conscious competence to unconscious competence so that we can get them through the 4 stages as quickly as possible. Okay?
The analogy I think of when I think of what you're talking about right now is like a child that goes to the doctor with a broken bone, and that doctor has to set it so that it heals properly, but they know it's going to temporarily cause more pain to that kid in that moment to set it properly, but if you don't do it, it'll never heal.
Correct. That's a great analogy. I love that, and I'm going to use it again.
Okay.
This is not a difficult concept, but it may seem callous. We as people who want to help and help others heal, help ourselves heal, we don't enjoy inducing pain to anyone, okay, ever. And that is a valid point, and that's why we need to see this as a learning technique using the model of the 4 stages of the learning process. We are aiming at positive emotional resolution rather than an inducing of negative emotional states. Obviously, professional discretion is inferred, and each person has to determine if this is a viable option for them or a client, okay? So use your best discretion. A client experiencing depression, as has been defined for this workshop, is experiencing a sensation along with their cognition that to them is as real as touching a brick wall, as demonstrated in the diagram developed when mapping sensations to emotions. So if you can consider that everyone was able to self-report back that they were feeling those different feelings in their body, whether it was anger, pride, regardless. You know, we all saw the same map of the different places lit up. So this was a self-reporting tool. That feeling of being angry is as real to our brains as touching this table. There's no difference. So to them, this is a real state. This is a real experience that they're having, okay? So once this emotional state has started, it's very difficult to break because our negative emotional states often create feedback loops fueled by the pattern, okay? So once I start feeling it, I know I'm feeling it. I am definitely feeling it. So if you try to tell me I'm not feeling this table, and I am feeling it, who do you think wins?
The client.
That's right. So once the emotional state is started, they're feeling it, and it's as real to them as a brick wall. So trying to tell them that that's not a real emotional state probably isn't going to be very effective. That's a feedback loop that's been created that now we have to break. Not try to convince, we have to break. Okay?
Well, that's like when I work with clients and they're like, well, I shouldn't be feeling this. And I said, there are no shoulds
Correct.
in emotions. You either are feeling it or you're not.
Right.
So if you're feeling it, that's real to you, like what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Very good. All right, let's go ahead and advance the screen. And breaking the pattern. Because this cycle is based upon experiential data and not logic, it's sometimes easiest to break by activating the limbic system in a new way that is comforting or soothing to our brains by shifting suddenly to a positive emotional state. I use the have-want technique to achieve this outcome, or kinesthetic mapping across. In kinesthetic mapping across, which is basically we start with the mapping of the positive emotional state, describe that to me, describe to me what a positive emotional state is, how does it move throughout the body, different things. On a scale from 1 to 10, how intense is the feeling right now? Crank it up, get it a little bit higher. We map that out first, okay? Well then, we map out the negative one, and mapping across is taking them back and forth from those positive emotional states to the negative to the positive, ending on the positive, okay? So setting states concerning the desired outcomes and the tactile sensations are the easiest way to map those patterns, and using those to elicit emotions and then break the pattern, okay? So setting positive emotional state. Imagine a positive, peaceful, or calm and relaxed feeling you enjoy feeling. Like many others, you already know how to feel relaxed and you can do so now. I do that quite often in inducing the original, peaceful, positive emotional state, okay? So that's basic script. If you want to, you can take a picture of that, if you write it down, but that's the way that I normally will start to induce a positive mental state. Now, how intense is this feeling for you on a scale from 1 to 10? That will let me know if they're actually participating with the exercise and be able to get them to put a number, a numerical value to that feeling. That makes it a little more real, okay? Just by getting them to put it on a scale. Question 2, would you be willing to describe any sensations in your body that you can feel which correlate to this feeling? Is it moving, radiating out from the chest? Is it like it's outward moving in? Does it feel like a lightness, like you're floating? Does it feel like a heaviness, like you're weighted down? Whatever it is, we want to try to map that out. Describe that sensation's geography, movement, or intensity. And that's really what you have to think about is geography, movement, intensity. That's what we're trying to get when we're doing kinesthetic mapping. So that's feelings. We're just talking about the tactile feelings. You want to know the geography, the location it's in, the movement, how it moves, and the intensity level. Those are the primary ways to map that out. Practice some of your own ways to connect your client to a positive emotional state by mapping the sensations now. So think about ways that you could ask this question to really get a good map of what that person's feeling when they're in a positive emotional state. Okay? Not all clients will relate to kinesthetic linguistic patterns and may need to implement the have-want technique. So we're going to go over that now. Okay, the have-want technique. This is a template that I use. If anybody wants this template, I have this available in a Word doc form, and you can just reach out to me and I'll send it to you. The have-want technique.
$19.99.
What's that?
For $19.99.
What are you experiencing that you no longer want? Okay, so this is what they have. Stay clear here. What do you have right now? What's going on that you no longer want? Okay, a lot of times here people tell me depression, smoking, overeating. I get all sorts of things right here. Okay, but whatever it is, I want it as clear and concise as possible. What's going on right now that you don't want anymore? All right. What's wrong with feeling that way for you? What's the problem with this problem? Why is this causing you frustration? Why is this a bad thing for you? And what that's doing is that's giving us why they want to change. It gives us the motivator. Why is this even important? Why are we here? What's going on with you that this is even something that you considered changing? So oftentimes I will make this easy. What's the problem with the problem? That's a lot of times that's my question. My question, what's the problem with the problem? Why is this a bad thing for you? What's the problem with the problem? So then I want, fast forward, I want them to project out in time and play out the scenario where nothing changes. What will be the outcome if nothing changes? Let's fast forward as far as you want to. You can continue down this path. You said it's really bad because of X. You told me that it's super bad, it's a problem for you because of X. Okay, so what if that problem doesn't get rectified? What's the outcome? At this point, they're going to be in a really dark negative space, okay? And so now, pattern interrupt time.
Session's up.
Positively stated. What do you want instead of what you have been experiencing? Positively stated. So if somebody just said, I have depression, I no longer want that. And I come over here, what do you want instead of what you've been experiencing? I no longer want depression. You just restated what you just stated. Okay? So I need you to state that in a positive way. Well, I'd like to have peace. I'd like to have joy. I'd like to be happy. I'd like to be content. Great. That's positively stated. Tell me what you do want, not what you don't want. Okay? Why is it important to feel this way? What would change for you if this happened? Now we find out the motivator behind what is the incentive to change it. What do you want instead of what it is you've been experiencing? So it's the opposite of this question. What's the problem with the problem? Why is there a solution on the other side? Why would it be a good thing to change this? What's so important to you? What do you see happening in your life if all of a sudden tomorrow you wake up and you have that thing? You were full of peace, full of joy, full of excitement, full of happiness. Why is that important? What would change for you if that happened? Now fast forward, how would your life change if when you left here this change had occurred? Go ahead and fast forward, project. What's different about your life now? How does your life change if this happened right now? What changes? And what you're going to get is, now they have to tell you, they have to start to visualize, they have to start to experience these changes, what this positive outlook would look like. So you should have, by this point, shifted them entirely from this negative state to this positive state. But if they're not fully there and the limbic system hasn't fully accepted it, I take them back through it again. So let me get this right. Right now you have depression, yes. And you're telling me that what's wrong with it is this, that it's causing you problems in relationships, you're not wanting to get out of bed, blah, 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 whatever it is. What will be the outcome if nothing changes? I may lose my job, I'll lose friends, I'll isolate myself, I may even end up wanting to kill myself. Wow, that's dark, right? Yeah, death, right? Ultimately death. So then we flip back over. Okay, so, and then you said what you want instead is to have peace and to be calm and everything. And if you have that, you see yourself going out, doing more things, having more fun, more freedom in your life to make choices. And if that happened, you can see yourself advancing in your career, you can see yourself finding love, whatever it is. And is that really important? Do you really want that? And we're really going back and forth. And this is maybe sometimes an easier way than the kinesthetic mapping because it's giving you an exact script to follow so that you set that emotional state, negative emotional state, set that positive emotional state, and then you just map it across. Okay?
Sometimes not sometimes, but especially with kids, I'll have them repeat it 4 times.
Sure. Yeah, that's fantastic.
4 times makes a habit, 4 weeks makes a habit.
Typically, I have seen that a minimum of 3 times going through this is necessary for the brain to start to get it.
Like with kids, I'll do a little bracelet,
Mm-hmm.
and each color will mean something, and then I said, okay, now repeat that pattern 4 times, and after I put it on them, I said, okay, now we're gonna go through it.
That's awesome.
And they're like, on the 3rd time, they're like, and I'm like,
I know, right?
I know, but
Yeah.
you gotta keep on going.
Yeah. I do the same thing when I'm counseling couples where the wife will say something to the husband and say, this is what I want you to say to me when I'm going through that. And then I'll say, okay, with that, let's not move forward. I want you to say back to her what she just said to you she needs. And it's never right the first time. Never. And then I'll say, okay, you got it wrong. Let's try it again. Let's just run it through again. Try it one more time. They'll try it through again, and it's never right the second time. And normally by the 3rd time, they're able to get what was actually said to them. But normally we have an idea of what's said to us. We don't actually know. So most of the time that pattern, they've got an idea of the pattern, but they're not really actually executing it in their mind until it gets ingrained in there. So following that pattern and doing that is teaching that system. So experiencing it, having them go from the experience is even more powerful than the cognitive recognition. Okay? So experiencing this, and that's what we're really trying to do. These sound like cognitive questions, but what they're really doing is creating limbic system shifts in emotional states.
With the autism, especially like the adults that I have that have
Mhm.
autism, I take them out
Mhm.
and I put them in that situation after
Mhm.
we talked about it.
Mhm.
It's really a lot better for them. They get it.
Like role play type stuff?
No, I like to take them out in the world.
in social settings and make them do it.
Settings, yeah.
I do that with my life coaching
They have
clients.
to see
If
it.
they have a
They have
problem
to
with
experience
confidence
it,
and
yeah.
boldness, introducing themselves to other people and making connections
Makes
quickly,
them do it.
I make them do it. We go out to the mall and we just
Yeah.
walk up to strangers and make friends.
Like if we'll go to the, I take one girl and we go to the shake thing. She would never, ever order herself. She'd
Mhm.
always be dependent on whoever she was with. I said,
Mhm.
here's $5, I want this. And I'll say, what do you want? And then I'll have her repeat it back. And then she'll go up, I'll have her go up there. Now she's like, okay, I'm gonna go order, what do you want?
That's awesome.
I know.
Very
she's
cool.
Awesome. She's
Very
so
cool. And so what this is we give them a plan, right? We show them how to work, we play out the outcome in their minds, we see it, they see it play out, and then when they actually do it, they actually go and do it, and they have that successful outcome, that just ingrains that pattern. That becomes part of, from now on, that's who they are.
She's
Because,
been in the office, she'd be like, I've tried that, it doesn't work.
Mhm.
I'm like, have you really
You
tried
create that
it?
positive feedback,
Yeah.
Yep,
have you really
yep.
tried
which
it?
increases their self-esteem.
increases their
Yeah, she's giving me
self-esteem.
a shake.
That's awesome. I love it. Very cool. Awesome. So that's the have want technique, and that is the last technique that we have to present today. Any questions about the have want or kinesthetic mapping across? Any questions about the 4 stages of the learning process and why this system works? No? Okay.
Well, how would you apply that to an elderly person that is aging and dying and they're just like, I'm done. I'm just kind of,
Check it out.
I'm checking
Sure.
out.
So,
I'm
well,
just going with the flow.
and generally, specifically, every case is unique, so I'd have to actually have that person here to work with them and to get through it. I assure you, this wouldn't be difficult regardless of the circumstance. However, like you're saying, we need to play it out, right? So in what way would this method not be able to help an elderly person shift from a negative emotional state to a positive emotional state?
They have to want the shift.
Yeah, I
That's
was
the
gonna
most
say, is
important
he
part of
wanting
any of
it,
this.
Or is he just like,
And
whatever?
as
I'm
mental
gonna
health
just
care
mask it.
professionals,
So,
a lot of times you guys have to see people who are court ordered and don't necessarily want help.
Right.
right.
In those situations, things like this are a lot more difficult to implement if the person doesn't absolutely want it. But it still works if they're willing to answer questions.
I just-
They may not want the
Do you wanna-
change,
do you wanna get
but
off this
if
treatment
they're
plan?
willing to answer questions, like my 8-year-old, if they're just willing to communicate, just willing to answer questions, most of the time I can set that negative emotional state, set that positive emotional state, and map them across without them ever even noticing.
Yeah, I mean, he's been, I was pretty stubborn. I didn't want him asking me those questions and trying to make me map my feelings. Like, I was just annoyed with that, for years. And it was like, stop trying to change me. But really, he had been doing amazing things and just really helping me. And I had no idea that he was doing all these techniques, over years on me, helping me become better. But
He brainwashed you.
but seriously, like older people that are
That's
just
what people
done,
think
it's like,
psychological
yeah,
stuff
I
is.
get
Some
that you're
some of it is. I
just
mean,
done, but
we've
there's gotta
seen
be joy
like, oh,
somewhere,
no.
we've
you gotta
seen
find
false
joy in
memories
something.
and things like that. I mean, that's pretty commonly known. False memories and distortions, deletions, all that stuff is a very common problem with our
Well,
human
and I just
psychology.
never realized I could have control. Like, I was always like, no, I'm an emotional woman. Like, I don't have control.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I was trying to do was establish in her brain, give it a new method for solving problems without her even having to know it. So what I would do is I would ask her how that feels and how she wants to feel, and we would just flip them back and forth. Just driving down the road, how do you want to feel about that? How would you like to feel? If you woke up tomorrow and you felt the exact perfect way that you'd like to feel about that, describe to me what that looks like.
Yeah. And I kind of learned that I really wasn't feeling as bad as I thought, too. Like, for years, I thought maybe I had depression, and I realized I was more content and actually more neutral than I even realized. I just thought you were supposed to be elated all the time, and that's
Because
just
a
not
lot has to
life.
do
As a
with
woman, I need to
culture.
be bubbly all the time.
Yeah, like,
Well,
always
and-
walking around happy all the time.
And we
We're
came,
like,
That's what I
we came to resolution
I'm not a
on,
Chick-fil-A.
we came to a resolution on something almost at the same time when I was doing a little bit of research into, you know, parenting and being raised in nurture versus nature and all this type of stuff. And I came across this study that was basically like, you know, all parents are doing their best. Your kids don't come with an instruction manual, and even parents who are abusive are doing their best. This is the only model probably that they've even ever seen. So a lot of times, like with slaves, there were people who would beat their kids because this is what they saw the slave owners do to the slaves, and so the slaves would beat their own children, and it's just a cycle of the best that they had known, the only way that they had known. And whenever we started realizing that, we kind of both at the same time were able to, as grown-ups, see our parents as peers and colleagues and forgive them for any mistakes that they made and just say they really were doing their best and just allow ourselves both to move on simultaneously. And I think a lot of healing for both of us came through that. Whenever there was just this realization that our parents are really genuinely doing their best. And that doesn't mean they always did the best thing.
Right, they were genuinely messed up.
Yeah.
Correct. And a lot of parents are
And you have
genuinely
to
messed up and
realize-
still doing their best.
They can forgive stuff, and it's like, oh, it's okay we beat our kid in the past.
Yeah, right, yeah.
We were
it's still-
unconscious incompetent, we didn't know.
Yeah. And the truth is that legitimately that is a good way to heal and get over it. But obviously, if there have been victims and people along the way, we don't want to minimize their pain.
Right.
And that's not the purpose of that. The purpose of that reframe is for a person to get their own
Right.
resolution, to get their own
Stop being
centeredness.
angry at something that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And allow yourself to move on past a circumstance. It's not a way to try to demonize victims or try to make victims feel like that they shouldn't feel pain from what they experienced, because I don't think that's right either. So.
Well, and what I was saying to you too is you said you realized that you were more content than you really knew and stuff. And I really do think that's a cultural thing.
I do too.
And our society really pushes on like having more,
Yes.
very materialistic and
Yeah.
comparing
Social
yourself
media
to others and
with
stuff.
yeah.
And in traveling the world and going to undeveloped and developing countries and stuff, people that have very little, lots of times those people are some of the happiest people,
Yeah.
you know. And then for me, it's always an appreciation to realize how much I really do have.
Yes.
And when I think I'm having a bad day and stuff,
Yeah.
it's really not as bad.
Right.
You know, like, I always thought, you know, if something drastically bad happened to me, you know, like I can go move to a developing or
Yeah.
undeveloped country and
With
be like a
$10,000
king
would be
there
fine.
in that
Yes,
society, you
exactly.
know, and
Mhm.
There's
Absolutely.
there's a lot of.
External pressures that aren't necessarily internal. And once we identify that they really are external, they're not anything that we have to take on ourselves. It is a really.
It causes so much less anxiety too.
Yes, well, and learning, one of my favorite things is, again, always thinking that I suffered with anxiety, and then learning that